Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do another inspirational albums video. If you don't know what that is, it's because I haven't done one in a while. But sometime back I started to branch out my channel content a little bit more. You know, I talk about, I'm an English professor, a writing professor, and then my scholarship has to do with mythology and how it affects our culture and our psychologies and whatnot, and you know, inspiration that we draw from culture. One thing I don't get to talk about though much, and just focusing in on my scholarship, is music. I am a huge music geek. Specifically rock, specifically that kind of hard rock from the 70s and 80s, into the 90s. Not really a grunge, you know, that kind of 90s style that came eventually in there, but there were still a lot of hard rockers still going today that had their start from the 70s and 80s. So the music they continued to make all into the 90s, you know, and even today. That's just, that music put me through the hellish torture of middle school, you know, and high school and whatnot in the day, and it still gets me through all the life has to throw at me today. Love that music. So I could geek out about it forever, but I just never had an outlet to talk about it, and I wanted to. So I decided, you know, one way to break into that content on my channel occasionally is to talk about albums that I find inspirational, that can do the same thing for me as, you know, say, stories and mythological tales from our popular fictions. So I started out, I was going to do a series of 3 albums, and probably expanded out more. I've got some other ones I want to talk about. And I did Alice Cooper, Last Temptation. We did Aerosmith, Permanent Vacation. And I've been promising a 3rd one that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And here we go. It's the album I'm going to talk about is Van Halen 5150. This, or 5150, however you want to say it, however you want to title it. This, I did a video a while back on Van Halen comics. And there was 2 editions of Hard Rock Comics. There was the one that was told the story of the first part of their career with David Lee Roth and whatnot. And then there was a second one with Sammy Hagar. It went right up to For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. And I talked about, and I mentioned in that video that, hey, David Lee Roth is great. Man, no disrespect to him. I love his solo career. Love the stuff he did with Van Halen, but I'm a Sammy Hagar guy. I'm just, I think there was such a unique chemistry that appeals to me and my taste when he came into the band. I understand there's also a very unique chemistry with Roth in the early years of Van Halen, and if you like that kind of showmanship that Roth gives you, no one in the world does exactly what Roth does, right? You know, I get that. But I think it's objectively true that Hagar's got the stronger range and a stronger voice in a lot of different ways. Again, that you may or may not care about that if you like other things, but just something about that dynamic, that, or at least the early dynamic, you know, things kind of turned south and got sour in the band later on, you know, with Hagar before he ended up leaving as well. But I didn't even know Sammy Hagar was a solo artist. You know, I'm, you know, coming at this younger, so I was first introduced to Hagar as the lead singer of Van Halen. And it was actually my favorite Van Halen album, and I think one of the best rock albums, period, is For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. That album, I should do a video sometime just talking about this album. I mean, it is, I remember an ad that was in the metal magazines at the time before it was coming out, and it had the whole band there. They were gathered around gripping a microphone, like singing back up or whatever, and the subtitle said, you know, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge by Van Halen, releasing such and such date, and it said, it'll kick your butt's butt. Darned if it doesn't. I mean, that album is, man, it's freaking amazing. So you might wonder, well, why aren't you choosing that album for the inspirational album? It is a wonderful album, and it's got, you know, inspiration of its own, but I would pick from my Van Hagar years, really would pick 5150 or 5150 for a number of reasons. This is the first album that they did with Sammy Hagar. And, you know, taking you back, if you were alive at that point, or just, you know, to understand what was going on, get the cover out of here. Of course, Van Halen had been a major force with David Lee Roth. Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing was just, you know, that was making them, putting them on the map everywhere, rocketing them into a lot of spotlight, as well as David Lee Roth's showmanship. He was very unique. I don't say this in any kind of derogatory term, but almost sort of like a Vegas stylish, you know, kind of, you weren't bored when he's on stage, right? And his antics and his just over-the-top personality, you know. was making the band as well known as I think Eddie Van Halen's guitar work was. So that when things were going really south in the band there, though, you read about this. A good source of reading about this is their old tour manager put out a biography when he was with them, in the David Lee Roth years, and he tells the story pretty well. But the chemistry between the band, the relationships were going south. Roth was really just very much wanting to do solo stuff, I think. In fact, I think he had done the little solo Crazy from the Heat album before he even officially left the band. So he was going that way, and there was a lot of tensions between him and the band and whatnot. Nobody was having fun. That's the real deal. So when he left, a lot of people thought that was it for Eddie Van Halen and Alex Van Halen and Michael Anthony. They thought that the band, Eddie and Alex were actually thinking that maybe the next step wasn't to necessarily get a new lead singer. Maybe they should just put out an album with a lot of different singers coming in. And, there's been all kinds of stories, even in the last few years, ever since Eddie's tragic death, about different singers that they'd approached, people that we never even really knew of before. Eric Martin of Mr. Big was even approached back when he was a solo artist, which I think would have been pretty interesting. But they ended up going with Sammy Hagar, and it was just a match made in heaven. It was a risk, though. It was a risk for both of them. Because could Van Halen, the band, survive? Could they actually, that's kind of unheard of. You never have a band switch lead singers. Lead singers, that's the face of the band. That's the personality that's out there. That's the one that's really interacting with the audience and whatnot and the listeners. It's very rare, and it's happened, and there are cases, but it's rare that you have a band as popular as Van Halen was, with as much success under their belt as they'd had, switch lead singers and still obtain that much success and even more with a new lead singer. Like I said, it's happened, but it was a risk. It's a risk for Hagar, too, because Hagar had just come off of his world tour for the I Can't Drive 55. I forget the album that was on, blinking right now. But, he had a very successful solo career. He had started out, of course, with Montrose, another precursor to Eddie Van Halen in a lot of ways. And, when that went south, Hagar's story is pretty inspirational in its own right. In fact, if you ever want a good inspirational biography, you check out Sammy Hagar's Red. It's really solid. It's a really good story, but it talks about the early years and everything. And he did the solo thing, for a while and made that work. He kind of build his solo career up. People knew his voice was so characteristic, and they knew him from Montrose. But he had to build that up, and he really had made it at that point in the 80s there. He was going to take a break for a while. He had cut off all of his hair. I always had that long, crazy blonde hair. He had cut that off pretty much for the most part because he was just going to take a break for a while. He was going to rest up after really just achieving it and making it as a solo artist. And Eddie calls him up, and there's wonderful stories. Professor of Rock has a great channel, and he's done some interviews with Sammy Hagar, and they talk about, and you can look those up where Hagar, from his own mouth talks about the meeting, and everything. And Eddie had his own studio called 5150 in his home at that point. That's where they had made the 1984 album, and he was wanting to go in some directions that Roth really wasn't happy with. They were able to kind of push some of those directions with the 1984 album, going more keyboard-based and whatnot. But Eddie was still wanting to go in some different directions and really advance and, experiment and whatnot. Roth was wanting to keep it more of the guitar-based rock, which I still think Eddie Van Halen was always guitar-based. 5150 is very guitar-based. We'll talk about that. But Roth went on to put together an amazing band with Vi and Billy Sheehan and all those people. So it was a great, stuff that he went on to do. But Van Halen was able to do this now. They got Sammy Hagar in, and Sammy Hagar can just sing whatever. There's the story when Hagar meets the guys first. At first, they're doing like a business talk about how they'd want to handle this or whatever. But when they first get together and jam, Eddie, Michael, and Alex had been in the studio all night, and they'd come up with a few songs, Summer Nights and Best of Both Worlds, I think, which those songs were going to be titled. They had written the music basically already and recorded it and whatnot. And Sammy just grabbed the mic and just started like improvising, just kind of, bebopping into the mic a little bit, but singing any lines that Eddie could play. Because he has this amazing range. And he would come up with a lot of the lyrics right there, and then he would fill in later and stuff like that. It was just this immediate chemistry. Everyone in the band at that time felt respected and felt an equal part of the of the concoction there that was to be Eddie Van Halen at that point. Excuse me, Van Halen, the band at that point. It was electric. You can hear it on this album. I pulled the slipcover out just so you can see it without the glare of the case. You can really hear it on this album. If you really want to see it in action, I'm going to provide a link in the description below to some videos from the tour they did. They released a tour video called Live Without a Net. For this album, they didn't do any official music videos because the record company was trying to pull some, shenanigans, trying to get them to pay for it and whatnot. And they said, nope, not doing that. They said, we'll go without videos and we'll see how long you want us to do without videos before you get off of it and pay for it. So by their next album, OU812, the record company was certainly paying for some videos. But so there's no, unfortunately, and that is unfortunate, we don't have any really cool produced music videos this time, but they did get a live video that they put together, a live edition set. It's called Live Without a Net. You can find just about all of it on YouTube these days, clips or whatever. I'll put a link to the opening song of that concert. And they open with a classic Sammy Hagar song, Only One Way to Rock. Wonderful song. And they open with it. I'm just going to show you the link down there and you can watch it. Eddie Van Halen, crazy solos around. He loved that song to solo on. Mike and Alex adding their own brand of groove to it. I have never seen four individuals have this much fun playing together on a stage. We've seen plenty of bands have a lot of fun performing, a lot of fun with the music, a lot of fun with the audience. I've never seen four musicians have this much fun playing specifically together. Really grooving off of each other, just feeding off of each other's energy. It's contagious. You cannot watch that video. If you like this kind of music, you cannot watch that video that I've got in the description below and not smile. It's so fun. It's so awesome. And even though that song in particular was an older Sammy Hagar song, that same kind of energy transfers all the way to the 5150 album. People who, were just stalwarts of David Lee Roth and just kind of wanted to poo-poo anything that happened, they tried to levy criticism saying, well, Eddie got softer. Eddie started playing softer when, the Hagar years. What are you listening to? Yes, they started putting out some ballads too. Well, as much of a ballad as you can be with Alex Van Halen slapping the snot out of those drums back there. But they put out, some slower like love songs. But that just added variety. You listen to 5150, you listen to songs like the title track 5150 are Good Enough. I mean, these are crazy, crazy rockin' guitar songs that are very intricate and just going all over the place. The energy is palpable, like I said. And it's inspiring. First of all, it's just fun, especially, the whole band. I'm a bass player, I've talked about that before. And Michael Anthony is one of my heroes as a bass player. It always kind of ticks me off. Yes, he's an amazing backing vocalist, and he deserves his props for that. But it always ticks me off whenever people bring up Michael Anthony, and the first thing they say is, yeah, he's amazing backing vocalist. I'm like, shut up. Somebody talk about what a monster bassist this guy is, and he has been for the longest time. We know that Eddie would play some tracks on the albums. He would play bass on himself, and you never really know which one. Occasionally from some of the older albums, and that's kind of a bummer. But the stuff he played, especially in the earlier days. The stuff that Michael Anthony plays live. He and Sammy Hagar went on. After Hagar eventually finally left the band, which was really sad. Man, that just hurt my heart when I heard that in high school. But I understand, after all of the issues that were going on, and you read about it. But he did some solo stuff for a while. Of course, Van Halen got Gary Cherone in for that kind of infamous album, which had some decent things on it here and there. But it definitely wasn't. It definitely was a step down, sadly. Then, of course, eventually they hooked up with David Lee Roth again and whatnot. And eventually they replaced Michael Anthony with Eddie Van Halen's son. And there's some unfortunate stories about that as well. But Sammy Hagar kept going with the solo career, put out some really awesome stuff. Eventually, though, Sammy Hagar with Michael Anthony on bass hooked up with Chad Smith from Red Hot Chili Peppers and the great Joe Satriani on guitar. And they formed a band called Chickenfoot. Put out 2 albums and 1 live album. Really solid stuff. Their first album, I think, is the strongest. Really, really good stuff. So that's you still got that groove going today, and that chemistry between Mike and Sammy anyway, still going today. So you hear that on 5150, and it's just like, man, these guys were so in tune with each other, having such a blast. They took a risk, they stepped out, And they did it for the sake of the music. You know, they weren't there trying to please record companies. Of course, they had to make the deals with the record companies to let Hagar come over from Geffen and so forth. But they were doing it for the sake of the music and for the sake of their art. And you don't see artists doing that at all today. Certainly not musical artists. You definitely don't see writers or anybody doing that today as much anymore. Really just focusing on the art. Let's make good rock. Let's make good music that we can be proud of, that we can have fun with and really enjoy performing. That was phenomenal. And you hear it. It's just, you can listen to that album, you can't help but to smile and just really groove along with it. There was a brief reunion with Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony coming back to the Van Halen brothers. They did a tour and a greatest hits, and there are a couple unreleased tracks, you know, and whatnot. So there's some of it there, even though tensions were still kind of crazy there. You can still hear more from that Hagar-Anthony chemistry anyway, like I said, through Chickenfoot, but their band now, Sammy Hagar and the Circle, really is a really amazing band that I just want to turn you on to here as I wrap up, in case you haven't heard of them. They just put out a new album, Crazy Times. Really, really solid music. I mean, Hagar's in his 70s now. He's one of the few rockers that still rocks every bit as hard as he ever did, even into old age. I'm not trying to be ageist or anything, but you know, a lot of rockers, you know, are bands. They get older, and you're still just you're in awe of them, and you want to respect them and everything. But you hear some of their live stuff, and you're like, wish I'd have caught you back in the day. Not Sammy Hagar. I mean, he's still wailing on it. This amazing band he's put together called The Circle. It features Michael Anthony on bass, you know, of course, from Chickenfoot and from Van Halen. It features Vic Johnson, who's the guitarist that Sammy Hagar used immediately after Van Halen when he started the Wah-Burritos, this little band he had. Vic Johnson's a phenomenal guitarist. He's written a lot of that stuff with Hagar from the original Wah-Burritos days. You know, Mouse Tequila, if you heard, you know, those great hits that Hagar came out with. And he can play anything. He can play all the Eddie Van Halen stuff. No, he's not Eddie Van Halen. No one claims to be. He doesn't claim to be. But he can play all that stuff technically, as well as all the other stuff they do. So when you see them live, they cover all of the old Hagar Van Halen stuff, the original Sammy Hagar stuff from his solo career, and even back in the days of Montrose and so forth. And then their fourth member is Jason Bonham. Now, you Leadheads will know Jason Bonham, of course, the son of the great John Bonham, the drummer for the epic Led Zeppelin. And Jason, of course, replaced John. You know, when you had First Page and Plant in the 90s did that little reunion where they just ignored John Paul Jones. It was horrible. But they eventually got John Paul Jones back in the fray, and they got Jason on drums, which was really the only way to continue as Led Zeppelin at that point. So Jason, you know, replaced his father, you know, after his father's tragic death, you know, and in many ways as Led Zeppelin's drummer there. And so they do a lot of the Led Zeppelin hits, you know, when they play as The Circle now, which is really awesome. My only complaint about their live shows is that they don't include some of Bonham's own band's work. You know, Jason Bonham in the 80s had a really cool band that he just called Bonham. And Mad Hatter in particular was, I think, the best album they did. I'd love to hear Sammy wail on some of those songs, you know. I wish they'd include a couple of those in the set now and then. But anyway, really great. If you still want some current music, I mean, this came out just this past year, Crazy Times in 2022. Really amazing songs. Got a cover or two on it, at least one cover of Elvis Costello's song, Pump It Up, believe it or not, and they rock it too. But, I mean, you just still hear that. It's so cool to hear that kind of music still being made. So few bands are still doing that. Alice Cooper's still certainly doing it. Def Leppard, they're still cranking out, you know, wonderful music. It's rare that you hear bands, even into their old age, still able to rock like that. But, like I said, the purpose of this video is going to that 5150. If you want to revisit just some of the most magical times of rock music, these Hagar years, oh, they're so good. Especially right on up to For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. It blows you away. The technical expertise of each member of the band, the songwriting and composition, of course, you know, taken to a new level by Eddie Van Halen and all that he did and gave us to us in music. And Sammy Hagar just wailing that voice of his over it all. It's just amazing. It's so fun. Like I said, you owe it to yourself to at least go click that link that I have in the description below to the video from Live Without a Net. Like I said, it's so fun. It's so contagious. It's so rocking. And then watch some of the other videos from that, either that tour or go check out 5150. It's really awesome. Wonderful inspirational album. I'll be back with more of these. I'm definitely going to want to do some Def Leppard, some Whitesnake, probably Tickle and Whitesnake next. But I love this music. I love this era, and I can geek out. I mean, look at this video. It goes much longer than they usually go, because I could just talk forever about this stuff. This was my real this was my real geekdom, you know, in middle school and high school. It was comics, but then it was also this music. It's it's so fun. So hopefully you're a fan of it too. If not, why'd you even watch this video this long? But hopefully that kind of content, I'm not going to turn the channel into nothing but this, but it's going to be some cool, you know, cool musical additions to the channel from now and then. So I finally got the third one in. We'll see about a fourth and fifth coming up at some point soon. Of course, I'll also do another archetype video, The Wanderer. I promise that one coming up next, as well as some more writing how-tos and story how-tos and whatnot. All that's to come. Until next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper, not only into the true blue stories you love best, but also some good, solid, inspirational music. Thanks for watching.